My brother always told me of how he saw a snow white clown standing in the field when he was about 17. The field is about a half a mile away from our house, and my brother said he ran home as fast as he could. He told my dad about it, but my dad shrugged it off because it was probably our neighbors. Our neighbors were all a weird bunch. They got drunk almost every night and done every drug known to man, it seems, so it wasn't doubtful that they would do something as sick as that. I always believed the clown was our neighbors, until about 3 weeks ago. I was riding my four-wheeler around my property when I saw someone run into my woods. I was pretty pissed off because people were always trespassing, so I drove on after them. I drove around my woods for about a half hour and I still hadn't found the person, so I left the woods and I went home. That night, I was getting in bed when I heard my dogs start barking. They do this all the time because of the coyotes that come out at dark, so I thought nothing of it. As I was drifting off to sleep, my dog's barking stopped with a sudden squeal. Being the fearless bastard that I am, I ducked under my covers and ignored everything, trying to sleep. I woke up the next morning and went outside to see my dogs. They had fur ripped out in places and looked like they had seen a ghost. My dad thought it was coyotes, but my dogs are huge and a coyote wouldn't have done that much damage to them. I looked outside my window and there were small scratches on the glass, which sent shivers down my spine. Still, I had to work and I went down to the fields. When I got down there, I could see a blood trail that led to the woods. Figuring my neighbor was the one that scared the dogs and got more than he bargained for, I followed the trail. It didn't last that long because it ended at a clearing where there was a makeshift bedding. On the bedding lay a clown. He hadn't noticed me yet, so I stayed there for about 5 minutes to see what the hell was going on. I scanned him over to look for cuts or anything, but all I saw was blood. The blood wasn't his. Nearby lay a deer with its stomach ripped open and its insides fallen out. I nearly vomited at the sight of it. The clown heard me gag and looked directly at me. He let a big smile cross his face and he brought his finger up to his mouth and he let a low blood-curdling shh. I sprinted home like no tomorrow and told my dad immediately. He got on the four-wheeler himself and went to the clearing. The deer was still there, but the clown was nowhere to be seen. My dad said he didn't know what to think, but that it was probably the neighbor, and he probably shot a deer. I knew better than that. To this day, I still refuse to go in my woods without a gun. Sometimes, I can swear I see a white figure running through the woods. When I was about 16, I went to a party with some of my high school buddies. I got pretty drunk and I spent the night on my friend's couch. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to go to the restroom. I went down the hallway and I turned to enter the restroom when I almost tripped over something. I turned on the light and found a creepy looking clown doll looking up at me from the floor. I didn't think much of it at the time. I kicked it to the side and I did my business and went back to sleep. The next morning, I asked my friend about the doll and he swore there was no such thing in his house, and it was not where I left it. I chalked this up to being drunk or him playing a joke on me, and I left it at that. But about 2 weeks later, my parents were out of town and I was staying by myself. I locked the doors and went to sleep. I awoke in the middle of the night and went to the restroom right outside my room. I turned on the light and that same damn doll was sitting on my bathroom counter, staring at me with the creepiest smile I'd ever seen. This crept me the fuck out and I grabbed it and went out the front door, down the driveway and threw it into the woods across the street. My friend, whose house I first encountered the doll at, had not been to my house since before the first encounter. This really bothered me for a few days because I had no idea how it could have traveled to my house. I even went to look for it the next day and it was gone. Fast forward a year, I hadn't seen the doll since. It was on my counter and my family and I had moved about 10 miles away. On my first night in the new house, I go to sleep, only to wake up about 2 hours later. I check my cell to see what time it was, and I see something next to me out of the corner of my eye. I turn towards it and shine the light from my phone towards the pillow next to me. There is the clown doll, just smiling its little creepy smile at me. I run out of the room and wake up my parents. I tell the story of the doll rather quickly to my dad, and he goes and checks out my room. He returned about 30 seconds later and tells me there is nothing there and to go back to sleep. I have not seen that doll since, and I am 28 now, but I remain afraid of clowns to this day. When I was younger, around 25, I would sometimes have random blackouts. I'm not that much of a drinker or druggie, so I wasn't too sure what caused or triggered these blackouts. I know I should have gone to the doctor or something, but I didn't have the money or time. Usually I would just wake up in random places, so it didn't seem like that big of a deal. On several occasions, I would wake up in the bathtub partially dressed. Over time, I became accustomed to these random outages and prepped my house to make sure I didn't hurt myself. Sometimes I would wake up with a bit of blood on my shirt or jeans, so I didn't want to risk it. Besides the blood, the only weird thing that I'd wake up to was empty makeup containers. After a couple of weeks of no blackouts, I assumed my problems were over. I started to get these mind-numbing headaches every so often. They hurt almost to the point where a sledgehammer to the head probably felt better. One night, after a long day at work, I decided to treat myself to a long shower. When I tried to turn on the lights in my restroom, I noticed they weren't responding to the switch, meaning they didn't turn on. I thought to myself, oh, must be something wrong with the breaker. That was the last cohesive thought I had that night. I woke up an hour later with my head above the toilet, warm blood dripping into the water. I seemed to have hit my head and, in my daze, leaned on the toilet. At least that's what I thought. About a second later, I heard my shower curtains move. Not having a roommate or anything, I naturally got freaked out. I then felt a sweaty hand cover my mouth and whisper into my ear. I've been waiting for this moment. I started flailing, freaking out. I could feel my heart rate rise and sweat glands start working overtime. He then whispered into my ear, "Let's see how long you can hold your breath." It was at that moment I knew I was dead. He pushed my head into the toilet. The mixture of blood, sweat, and water seeped into my cuts, making them sting even more. After what felt like an eternity, he lifted my head up and said, lemons." He then pushed lemons into my wounds, causing the stinging to upgrade to complete and utter pain. Right after that, he put a cloth sack over my head. I tried reaching for anything that could help me fight him off, but it was too late. He had me cornered. I could feel something crawling on my head, and right at that moment, he whispered through my cloth-covered ear, "Those are spiders." I then felt hundreds of tiny fangs pierce my head. He then said, "Good night," and I assumed left me to die. I woke up hours later in the hospital, surrounded by police officers. I asked them what happened. They explained to me that a homeless man, covered in poorly applied clown makeup, had been going around hiding in people's showers for a couple of months. Apparently, he had been living in my one-bed, one-bathroom apartment for the past few months, and the blackouts were due to him drugging my food and basically messing with me until he got the courage to try and kill me. How I didn't notice this is a complete mystery on my part. I guess moral of the story is to always check behind your shower curtains. I can still remember the first time I saw the clown in the church. I was 14 and my family had moved to a house in the town where my mother had grown up. Across from our house was an old church, and through one of the side windows, I saw it. A clown. Now when I say a clown, I don't mean some weird dude dressed up hiding out somewhere, waiting to scare any passerby. No, it was one of those animatronic ones people put out around Halloween. I couldn't make out many of its features because I was at a distance to start with, but from where I was standing, I could tell it was fake. My mom saw what I was looking at as we both stood next to the car parked in our driveway. "You know what? When I was a little girl, that was the church I went to with Grandpa and Grandma," she said. "Why is that clown in there?" I spoke not with the intention of ignoring what she had just said, but more wanting an immediate answer to my question. My mom laughed a bit as she answered, "Who knows? Probably just forgot it there after Halloween. Somebody playing a dumb joke. So, come on, help me take these things inside." We finished unloading the car, being joined by my older brother Steve, who had gone in ahead of us. Now, I love my brother, but he could be a real dick sometimes. It wasn't long before he spotted the clown as well and laid into me. "Ooh, he's been waiting for you, Mark. He'll come for you when you're asleep," he said while raising his arms in an attempt to frighten me. But it didn't work. At least that's what I told myself at the time. "Asshole," I said under my breath. Later, we had takeout for dinner and I got to bed. School was already starting the next day, and I was tired from the drive and unpacking so far. When I got home from school the next day, I was alone at the time. Mom wasn't back from work yet, and Steve was nowhere to be found. I was about to let myself in when I looked back over at the church. The clown was still there, but it wasn't where it had been the day before. It was standing in front of the middle window now. It had moved. I walked across the street to get a better look at the clown. Still to this day, I don't know what compelled me to do it. Plain curiosity, I suppose. I couldn't help but remember my brother's words from the other day. "He's going to get you, Mark." It was evident the church had been through some rough times. Its white paint was faded, dirty and chipped off everywhere. The 3 arched windows that were facing me all looked neglected, and they looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. The inside had been hollowed out with no pews or any other furniture remaining. Then my focus shifted to the clown. It was about my height, 5'7" or 5'8", with a suit of rainbow-style alternating red and white stripes that shined like silk in the daylight. Its face and hands were gray and looked like they had been fashioned out of modeling clay with bumps and wrinkles all over. Its scraggly red hair exploded out of the back of its head, except where it was bald on top. And it had a piercing stare to its jaundiced yellow eyes, like it looked right into my soul. It stared and smiled with its mouth full of square teeth. It wore a cardboard sign on its chest with words that looked like they had been written in red marker. The words said, "Hug me." A single thought went through my mind at that moment. Why the hell would anyone leave this in a church? I had had enough exploration for the day, and I walked back home, not even looking back once. I spent the rest of the day watching TV and doing what little homework I had left. Mom got home not long after, and so did Steve. I tried to not think about the clown that night, but even as my eyes started to feel heavy, its repulsiveness swelled in my mind. The next day, while I was waiting for the bus to pick me up, I stole a glance over at the church. The clown had moved again. This time, it was in the window closest to the church's front door. It had to have been Steve doing it. It was just like that asshole. Soon the bus arrived, and I sat in a random seat, staring out the window at the church. I spent most of the day at school distracted, and I was pissed, mostly at Steve. Later on, I was waiting for Steve when he got home. Mom had picked him up. "So you think you're funny, huh? You and your stupid friends," I said. Steve glanced at me before speaking. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about, weirdo." My mother stood there silent as I spoke. "I'm talking about the damn clown. You keep moving it, trying to scare me." I pointed towards the living room window in the direction of the church. Steve started laughing as my mom joined in. "Okay, I don't know what's going on here, but it needs to stop. You're both getting too old for this." She pointed at Steve as he continued to profess his innocence, and soon after he made his way upstairs. I could feel tears forming in my eyes at that point, mostly out of anger and frustration. I went to say my piece, but my mom didn't want to hear about it. "It's just a stupid clown. Now go get cleaned up for dinner," she said. The next few days passed without any extra excitement. School went by quick, and I'm guessing my mom must have talked to Steve because the clown hadn't moved anymore. It wasn't until Friday after school that I noticed something was different again. I had gotten off the bus when I did what now had become the routine for me. I looked over at the church and I saw the clown, still in the same window, but even from the edge of my driveway I could tell something had changed. I cautiously walked over, and as I got closer, the differences stood out even more. It looked a full foot taller, maybe more so. Its once normal legs now looking like long stilts, and its arms and fingers looked like they'd grown with its wrists and knuckles bent at odd angles, now pointed at the window. But its face was the worst part. Its eyes looked wider and teeth more knife-like and pronounced. My subconscious brain was picking up all of it. It looked meaner. A very real chill ran down my spine, and I turned with haste to make my way back home, never looking back once, even as I slammed and locked her front door shut behind me. I decided to stay up that night and watch the church, watch the clown. If my brother was pulling off some elaborate prank to mess with me, then I had to know. I had to catch him in the act. I faked going to bed, and I sat down quietly by my window. Even in the dim lighting of the night, I could still make out the shape of the clown. I knew Steve was already in his room, and that Mom would soon retire for the night after a glass of wine and some bad sitcom TV. All I had to do was wait it out. I don't know what time I had fallen asleep, nor did I remember laying down on the floor up against my bedroom wall. I woke up slowly with my head in a semi-daze, and I instinctively peered out the window. It took me a few moments to focus, but then I saw something that immediately set me into panic mode. The front door to the church was open, and the clown was nowhere to be seen. I went to get up when I heard a noise that sounded like stairs creaking. The steps that led to our upstairs did creak, albeit not enough to wake someone up if you knew where to step. My first thought was maybe that my mom had stayed late and was finally making her way up. I hadn't checked the actual time yet. Then I heard it again. Someone was coming up the stairs. Then I heard another sound that made me question who it actually was. The noise was like fingers being lightly dragged slowly along the wall, and they were close, right on the other side of my bedroom. I pressed my ear to the wall as silently as I could to hear better. I could still hear footsteps, heavy but yet somehow still eerily quiet in the dead of night. Somebody was trying very carefully not to be heard. Not Mom. Steve. And then the footsteps stopped. I sat, ear still pressed to the wall. A few silent seconds passed. What is he doing? Soon I could make out another distinct sound. The doorknob to my room was being turned. I sat there on the floor, my gaze now focused and my eyes better adapted to the darkness. I could clearly see the knob being turned and my bedroom door being inched open. Then came heavy breathing, and I could make out the horrible, wretched face of the clown peeking in at me. I did the only thing my body would allow me. I screamed, "Mom!" The next few moments were a frenzy of activity. My mom's bedroom door flew open at the same time my bedroom light was flipped on. In the flood of the light, I saw the clown. No, I saw a clown mask on top of a black Metallica t-shirt. And then Steve took the mask off and erupted into laughter as I've never heard before. "Oh man, you should have seen your face," Steve said. Mom barged in behind him. "What the hell is going on, Steven?" she said while glaring at him with an intensity I had only witnessed a couple of times before. "It was a joke," he said. "Look at his face. He practically shit himself." "Get out and go to bed. We'll talk about this tomorrow and whether I'm going to ground you for life or not," Mom said. Steve walked out, his laughter silenced with the clown mask hanging limply from his hand. My mom didn't say anything else to me except to go to bed and then close my door. I distinctly remember standing there in place for a while before moving again as the house once again went silent. I looked out the window one more time before surrendering to my bed. The church door was still open, swaying in the nighttime wind. The clown was nowhere to be seen. After that night, I never saw the clown again. As time went on, I eventually accepted the fact that the whole thing had been a trick by my brother and one or two of his friends. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed silly to me, being so afraid of something that couldn't possibly have hurt me. I was always a little skittish around any clowns, whether they were human or robotic. I secretly dreaded when Halloween came around despite my attempts to appear otherwise enthusiastic. Over the years, it became kind of a running joke in my family. That was at least until I got a call from Steve yesterday. He didn't sound like his usual happy self. Sometimes he'd call asking me for money or to just shoot the shit. But one way or another, he'd always managed to bring up the clown incident. Like it had just happened yesterday. But not this time. This time he sounded downright spooked. This time he went right into bringing up the clown. "Hey bro, you remember that whole clown thing from years back?" He said it with a tone like we had never talked about it before. "Yeah, it's getting kind of old, don't you think?" I said. "Well, it's just there was something about that night I never told you before," he said. "Never told me what?" I was waiting with breathless anticipation. "That night after you and Mom went back to bed, I snuck back out over to the bathroom. I could have sworn I saw something move ahead of me before I came into your room," he said. There was silence from his end. I could sense this was hard for him to talk about, but I had to know. "Well, what was it?" I said. It was hard to see because it was dark and I had put the mask on already. But I swear I saw someone go into the bathroom. I thought maybe it was Mom, but the bathroom light never went on and I never heard the door shut. I had the phone pressed so hard to my ear it hurt, with my heart starting to race in my chest. What he said next made my chest feel heavy. So I went back later and checked. The bathroom window had been opened, and when I turned the light on, I saw something on the floor. There was another moment of silence before he spoke. It was a red pom-pom. It couldn't be. Why are you telling me this now? Steve sounded like he was on the verge of crying as he stammered. I saw it last night, in the alley behind my apartment. It was just standing there. God, it looked 10 feet tall, and it was wearing a sign. It said, "Hug me." October 2016, the world was affected by one of the single most bizarre cases of terroristic incidents in modern history. Starting in the summer and increasing until the end of October, numerous cases of attempted kidnapping, murder, and robbery by men dressed in clown costumes were reported. Many of these cases occurred in the United States. However, over a dozen of other countries were affected by these attacks. This consistency of attacks by men dressed in clown costumes sparked not only school closures, but also created a modern-day witch hunt. It was mid-October when my next-door neighbor went missing. He was just 12 years old, and by this point of the clown sighting phenomenon, it was quickly speculated that this was clown-related. In the days leading to his disappearance, several town residents even reported having seen a man dressed in a clown costume walking down the highway along the tree line of the forest on the south side of our town. When he disappeared, it was after school. He simply went to school that morning and never came home. The school was only a few blocks away from home, so he walked almost every day that the weather was agreeable. During the time following his disappearance, when his mother and father were searching desperately for any sign of their son, I did my best to avoid them. In fact, even though we were somewhat good friends, I haven't spoken to them since the day their son went missing. I haven't spoken to anyone about that day. But as we near the anniversary of that day, I can't keep quiet. I saw what happened to their son. I was walking my dog that day and saw him. He even waved at the boy as he crossed the street. If I close my eyes, I can still see the scene, like the image of a bright light that's been burned into my retinas. Walked along the tree line, about to take the shortcut through the canal road that bisects the trees. I enjoy walking that same road, as many other residents of the neighborhood do, and so I followed him. I don't know if I'd actually intended on going that way when I initiated my walk, but suddenly the idea came over me to go that way. It was a compulsion I couldn't ignore, like the need to drink water. I crossed the street then, probably about 50 feet or so behind the boy. I made my way down the dirt road that ran alongside the canal. I remember getting a sense of unease then, in a way I can only describe as the feeling as a child gets when he knows there's something under the bed or behind the closet door. I didn't see the man until it was far too late for me to take action. He was maybe 3 feet away from the boy, hiding in the brush. When he stepped into view, he didn't leap out and yell like they do in the movies, but simply stepped onto the road with a calm demeanor that sent chills up my spine and made the flesh on my arms roughen. I opened my mouth to yell, but before I could, the man had grabbed the boy by the back of the neck. My dog, whom I'd forgotten completely about, began to bark and snarl. Without hesitation, I let go of the leash and bolted for the man in the clown suit. The clown picked up the boy, who was doing nothing at all to save his own life, and carried him into the woods. I was closing in then, but I was still at least 20 feet away. I bellowed my brains out to the empty forest, but nobody except the trees heard my cry. As soon as he crossed over the tree line, I lost sight of them. I stumbled into the woods, the dry leaves cracking beneath my shoes, and found a sick sensation of disorientation coming over me. I collapsed onto my knees, and the world spun. I felt the warmth of blood on my upper lip, and everything went dark. When I awoke, perhaps an hour later, it was to the whine of my dog in my ear. My eyes fluttered open, and I first saw my dog's short snout. Then as I sat up and my vision focused, I saw the clown. It stood there motionless in the fading light, like a statue between the trees, and I saw the blood dripping off its hands. I tried to scream, but I couldn't find my voice. My dog whimpered and backed away with me, terrified of the clown just as I was. It stepped forward, and its hands rose to the mask as I scrambled to my feet. It grasped the green hair on the top of the mask and pulled downward, and what I saw beneath the mask is something I wish I could forget. Where its eyes should have been was nothing but pale white skin, and below that was a lump of a nose that looked like it had been carved by an amateur sculptor. Its mouth was smeared with blood, and as its thin lips parted into a sick smile, I saw sharp, crooked teeth and a thin black tongue. My dog whimpered again and pulled at my pant leg with his teeth, and I turned on my heels and ran. I've never told anyone that story. I didn't think anyone would believe me, but it's been a while now, and I think they might be coming out again. I heard on the news the sightings have sparked up again. Don't let your children out of your sight, and if you see a clown, run. I don't know what I was thinking. It seemed like an innocuous idea. Find one of the clowns, corner it and find out why they're doing all of this. I would become a media sensation. My findings might have led to blowing the entire clown sensation wide open, all because of my bravery. I'd be a hero. At first, my town seemed to be a sacred land that no clown dare touch. It was a God-fearing blue-collar town where everyone knew their neighbors and the postman could eat for an entire week, thanks to the housewives and their generosity. There was one school, a Baptist-run institution that was surprisingly focused more on the education than religion. Everyone who has ever lived in the town that went to that school, just like everyone here, got their first job at the window factory. It was simply how things were. Sure, there was crime. One time, for example, the little Daxterly's oldest boy lashed out and broke 3 windows at the church. It was all over the news and the papers. People would gossip, of course. However, no one chastised him for his actions. Instead, everyone was supportive and got him the help he needed. I'm not trying to brag, this was just a genuinely pleasant and nurturing community. When the news broke that a clown was seen sitting on the steps of the school the other night, it sent a ripple throughout the calm town. Everyone had been following the stories, yet no one was concerned of seeing them here. Why would we be? We all knew it was a prank, albeit a stupid one, that would fade away into obscurity. It was chalked up to the Daxterly boy lashing out again. Until the next sighting. And the next. Then another. Then 2 clowns together. It wasn't until a dog was found mutilated in the middle of the town center that the population collectively began to panic. Curfews were enforced, and shops closed early. School and church service was reduced to twice a week. Had someone passed through after dusk, they would have found a ghost town. Fear was running the town now. I wanted it to stop. My plan was simple. Every night since the first incident, the clowns have been seen on the school grounds or the church grounds. All I would need to do is stay out of sight of the sheriff while I waited to see a clown. Then simply run up on it, then find out what the hell they're in the town for. Easy. Darkness had finally fallen the night I made the decision to act. I've never believed in guns, nor taken a weapon to an unarmed fight, but I have to admit, the hysteria was beginning to grate on me at that point. I went out with a wooden Louisville slugger and had a flashlight. It was slightly after 10 p.m., and most of the residents were already sleeping in hopes of seeing daylight sooner. That made it easy for me to avoid the sheriff, as I was able to cut through backyards and hide in driveways when the patrol cars got too close. This was a small town. On a regular night, I could walk to the school in less than 10 minutes, but law enforcement wasn't taking any chances. It took me almost an hour to reach the school, and when I did, I was upset to see nothing waiting for me. Nothing. I posted up in a nearby tree that had a clear view of the front of the building and got comfortable. Something in my gut told me I was going to have a long wait ahead of me. I wish I could say that a few hours into my shift, a clown came and I was able to get my answers. I really do, but I fell asleep. I woke up on the lawn under the tree to blinding daylight and a gun in my face. The officer was stern and visibly shaken, but nice enough to me. At the station, he gave me coffee and a nice selection of pastries and fruits to choose from for breakfast. In other cities, this might be seen as them buttering up a suspect to get them to talk, but not here. This was Southern hospitality at its finest. We talked for a while about everything going on with the clown situation. The conversation wasn't focused on my actions like I had expected. The officer was more interested in what my thoughts were on how to deal with this clown situation that was currently paralyzing the town. I think he saw my actions as more brave than incriminating, like I wanted. I could still be a hero. After a couple of hours, we came to an agreement on the situation. The sheriff's office would turn a blind eye to any investigations I wanted to conduct alone, even after hours. However, any criminal activity would be penalized to the fullest extent, especially assault. He made it very clear that no matter who was behind this, I wasn't allowed to touch a single hair on their head. It was a reasonable compromise. That night, I returned to my post. It was a lot easier without having to stay out of sight. A simple nod of acknowledgement was the only exchange I had with the officers patrolling the streets. When I made it to the school, I found no signs of life yet again. I climbed the tree and settled in for a long night. About 2 hours into my wait, I still hadn't seen any signs of a clown. My eyes were getting heavier by the minute, so I made the decision to inspect the grounds and see if I could discover anything indicating a clown might be in the area. When I jumped to the ground from the lowest branch, I was greeted by a tall figure wearing a bright, shiny blue bodysuit that was bedazzled with buttons and patterns. I'd be lying if I said I didn't fall back against the tree, gasping for air. All confidence left my body as my eyes met its face. I had been expecting a poor silicone mask, not a white human face with red lips and blue hair staring back at me. The lack of a red nose unsettled me as well. This wasn't the clown I was prepared for. I couldn't move. My body had shut down on me when I needed it most. The clown didn't move, didn't even blink. It just stared at me deeply with bright green eyes and a smile that was permanently affixed on its face. A standoff. After a few more minutes, the clown reached one of its white-gloved hands out to me. I looked to its hand and then back to those oddly bright eyes without budging an inch. Nothing about the clown had changed aside from its arm. The clown still didn't blink. It still had that fucking smile. It nodded a couple times towards its hands like it wanted me to grab it. I was confused, but with the hope of humanity being behind the costume, I reached out to shake the outstretched hand. Before I was able to fully lock palms with the clown, I was met with a light shock that radiated up my forearm. I screamed. The clown arched its head back, grabbed its belly, and laughed at me. It sounded like there was a broken squeaky toy lodged in its throat. The electric jolt must have been enough to revitalize my body as I jumped up and shoved the clown away from me as hard as I could. It fell back in an exaggerated manner, flailing its large white shoes up and sliding on its rear end across the grass. After a brief pause and a look of disbelief, the clown began to silently cry while rotating its fists under its squinting eyes and stomping its heels into the ground. I was annoyed with the dramatic situation and I started yelling at it. Nothing remotely coherent came from my mouth, just a smorgasbord of profanities and blame. Once I relieved my pent-up frustrations, the clown stopped pouting and began its squeaky laugh again, but this time it was accompanied by another noise, a louder noise that was coming from its mouth. The air around me was overtaken by a sound that was similar to a million cicadas, clicking in a deep whisper. I couldn't hear the clown in front of me any longer. Everything was overtaken by whatever was making this background noise. I fell back again, grasping my head in pain and attempting to cover my ears. And then I hear a loud bang. My heart stopped. I looked up and the clown in front of me was now a Rorschach painting across the grass. My interrogating officer was standing next to me with a shotgun. He yelled at me as he grabbed my arm and yanked me to my feet. Surrounding the entire area were clowns of all shapes and sizes, walking towards us with their mouths wide open, slightly facing the ground. We barely made it to the station, circumnavigating all the clowns that overtook the streets. It had been 38 days since that incident. We've been barricaded in the station, taking rotating shifts in the camera room. The clowns, they have taken on our everyday lives. We watch them go shopping, walk dogs, go to school and work. It's like they're trying to replace us. The only peculiar thing they do is surround the station at night and laugh in unison, all night until the sun rises. Then they continue on like nothing happened. We've got full utility access here, and we have been keeping up on the news. We know it's spreading, and I fear that my actions that night may have caused them to resent humans. I wanted to be a hero, but I can't find a way to stop this. Greenville is gone. Don't let the media fool you. Stay away from here. More importantly, don't go near the clowns.